So here we have a layer. On top of that, we have another layer. Let's turn that on. It seems like it is destroying the image. Now, if you simply decrease the opacity, see what happens? It is just making it more and more transparent as you begin to decrease the opacity. However, if you decrease the fill, see what happens? How is that happening? It makes the image more and more interesting. So here's the before, here is the after. Fantastic, isn't it? So what is happening? So let us rewind a little bit first. Under general circumstances, opacity and fill tend to work the same. So in this case, here we have a beautiful scenery. On top of that, we have added some text. But the scenery is way too bright and it's distracting the text. So how do we make the text stand out? Simply by adding a little bit of blackness. So just above the background layer, we're going to create a fill layer. All right, now what is a fill layer, you might ask? It is an adjustment layer that fills. So if you click on the adjustment layer icon, if you look at the top group, you see all of them are in a group. This is one group, that is one group, right? So at the top, we have 3 adjustment layers: solid color, gradient, and pattern. They are fill layers. What they do is create a layer that fills the canvas with either a solid color, a gradient, or a pattern. So this time, let us choose solid color and we're going to choose black, all right? Now, of course, we don't want it to be completely black, so we would decrease the opacity. So as of now, if we are decreasing the opacity to, let's say, 40%, 42, this is how it looks. However, if we decrease the fill as well to around 42%, it looks the same. So in general terms, they work the same. However, under 2 and just 2 special circumstances, fill reacts differently as opposed to opacity. And you can take advantage of this to create some incredible effects. And we're going to do that in this video, so make sure to download the project files. Now, before we continue, do know that we are talking about the difference between opacity and fill in the layers panel. Please don't get it confused with the brush tools, opacity, and flow. That is a whole different thing, and we will discuss it in a future lesson. If you don't have the patience, you can watch this video after this one. Let's start with the first condition, where opacity and fill work differently, and this brings us to the very beginning of the video, and that is special blend modes. Now, what do I mean by special blend modes? So right here, if we create a simple color layer or solid color adjustment layer by clicking on the adjustment layer icon, and then let's choose solid color. Let us choose a color like this. Hit OK. All right. And in the previous lesson, what did we learn? Let us not forget, what is one of the most common ways we can make a layer interact with the other layers beneath it in various different ways? And that is blend modes. So if you go ahead and choose any of the blend modes, like let's say overlay, this is how the image would look like. It allows this color to interact with the layer beneath. In this case, if you just decrease the opacity, it makes it more and more transparent. If you decrease the fill, it does the exact same thing. However, there are 8 special blend modes, or in other words, some mysterious blend modes, and this is the list. If you choose any one of these blend modes, opacity and fill will work differently. So let us choose one of them. First of all, let's choose a warmer color. So I'm going to choose something like this. And by the way, we can change this color later. So this, my friend, is the normal blend mode. This is how an image would look like without altering anything. And of course, you would decrease the opacity to make it more and more transparent. Now, if you choose one of the 8 special blend modes, and I'm going to choose hard mix, it makes the image look terrible. If you decrease the opacity, it makes it more and more transparent, as with everything else. However, in this case, since this is a special blend mode, if you decrease the fill, it controls the projection. It decreases the intensity. It changes how it interacts with the entire layer. So let's say for this image, I'm going to go for a lower number, like 20%, and it's making it look incredible. So here is the before, here is the after. And this, my friend, is one of the most important applications of this method, and that is color grading. Let us go a little more advanced. Let's say I like this effect, but not so much on the dark areas. So how do we take this effect away from the dark areas? We're going to use a new concept here called blend if. If you double click on the right hand side of the layer style dialog box shows up, and we will use some of these effects later. But for right now, we'll focus on this area called blend if. It says right there, blend if. What it does is that it allows you to control the visibility of the layers according to the brightness levels. Doesn't make sense? Don't worry, we're in this together. So right now the effect is all over the image. We want to take the effect away from the dark areas. Now, the dark areas of where? The dark areas of the layers that are lying underneath the selected layer. So again, let us revise that. We want to take this effect away from where? From the dark areas. Dark areas of what? Dark areas of the layer that lies under it. And that is why we will work with the sliders of the underlying layer. All right. And to remove this effect from the dark areas of the underlying layer, because this layer is lying underneath it, we will take the slider of where it is dark to the right. And as we do that, have a look, this effect is going away from the dark areas. But then again, this is very harsh. How do we make the transition smoother? We hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on the slider to break it apart, and take it apart. Similarly, if you don't want this effect in the bright areas, you would do exactly the opposite. So if you take the slider from the right to the left, it takes it away from the bright areas. Now we want the transition to be absolutely smooth, so these two sliders need to be as far apart as possible. And as soon as we do that, have a look at the effect. Hit OK. So here's before blend if. I'm going to press Ctrl or Command Z. The dark areas are absolutely crushed. Here's after it. Looks just wonderful. So here's the before, here's the after. Makes the image pop. Now in real world color grading, I wouldn't even go this intense. I would choose an opacity like maybe even 46 or 32, something like that. And have a look. Here's the before, here's the after. Very slight difference, but makes a significant difference. Now a little experiment for you to try. Use the same technique to add one more solid color adjustment layer of a different color, but this time add it only to the dark areas. And how would we do that? Just a hint, create a solid color adjustment layer, use the blend mode or the fill you want to use, and using blend if, do just the opposite of what we did. Now, while we are here, let us understand the concept of blend if a little more. So let's say you created a new layer, and this is not an effect on an image. This is just to understand. And we create a gradient from black to white. Let us choose linear gradient. And by the way, I picked the gradient tool right here, picked linear gradient, and picked black to white, okay? And we created a gradient like this. If we double click on the right hand side of the layer, if I wanted to take this layer away from the dark areas of the layers that lay under it, I would move the sliders of the underlying layer. All right, it's taking it away from the dark areas of the underlying layer. Now it's taking it away from the bright areas of the underlying layer. However, if you work with the sliders of the current layer, it will simply take the dark and the bright areas of the current layer away. So right now, if we work with this, it just takes the dark areas of this existing layer. If we do this, only the bright areas of the existing layer. So you get how blend if works now. You can also take advantage of fill to create a fake sun. And by fill, I mean the fill right here and fake sun at the top. That didn't sound right. And the way you do it is by simply creating a new layer by clicking on the new layer button right there. Take the brush, take a soft round brush, click on the drop down right there and choose the soft round brush. Make the brush a little larger. You know how to make it larger or smaller? Use the bracket keys. Let us not forget. And now let's choose a warmer, brighter yellowish color. So single click right here on the foreground color box and we're going to choose a color like this. Let's go with something like that. That's a bright sunshine color. Keep in mind we can always change it with the help of clipping masks. We learned about it in previous lesson as well. So I'm just going to dab right here. Don't dab in the corner where you want to add the sun. Dab somewhere in the middle so that you can move it later and adjust it or transform it. So I'm just going to dab right over here. Now, before doing anything, I always recommend that you convert this layer into a smart object. You know why? We learned about it again in the previous lesson, so that when we make it smaller or larger, we don't lose details. Even though this is blurred, it's a good practice to do every single time. So right click on it and choose Convert to Smart Object. One other thing you can do is go to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters. Both of them do the exact same thing. Let us name this Sun, S-U-N. Now it is time for us to choose one of those 8 blend modes. And in here, we're going to choose Color Dodge. Now, just to give you an idea, this is the lighten group, this is the darken group. Any blend mode you choose right here will only darken the image. Any blend mode you choose right here will only brighten the image. That's the general idea. So right here, we're going to choose color dodge. It is one of the 8 special blend modes right here. Now it doesn't look like it is doing much. You can move it around. It looks like a sun. It's okay, but it's not as great. Sun is something that is so bright that it blinds out stuff. How do we make that happen? So right now what is happening is that transparency of the layer is shaping the layer. What do I mean by that? Let us change the blend mode to normal. So right here in the middle, it is very opaque. And as we go away from the middle, in this layer, in the sun layer, it becomes more and more transparent. And that is shaping the layer. But we don't want that to shape the layer. We want the interaction of the sun with this image to shape the layer. Let's make the layer thumbnails a little bigger by right-clicking on the empty space and choosing large thumbnails. So we want the interaction to choose the shape of the layer. And how do we make that happen? First of all, change the blend mode to color dodge. Okay. Secondly, you double click on the right hand side of the layer style dialog box shows up, and uncheck transparency shapes layer, because we don't want the transparency to shape the layer. Instead, we want the interaction of the layers with the layers beneath to shape the layer. If an area is dark, we want to show less of it. If an area is bright, we want to show more of it. So if you uncheck that, have a look what happens. So here's the before, right? Let's uncheck it. Have a look. Suddenly, the treatment changes. Hit OK. And now when you move it around, have a look. In the dark areas, it looks like it's peeking through the tree. And in the bright areas, it's absolutely blinding out that area, just like a real sun. So you can place it wherever you like. Again, this does not have to be realistic. If actually a sun was right here, the light would be that way. But then again, we are creating art here. As long as you're happy doing it and it looks good to you, that's all that matters. Don't worry about 1 or 2 negative people in the comments. They're always going to be there. Focus on the people who you love, focus on the people who are positive, and focus on the people who are pushing you to do amazing stuff. And in a rare scenario, if you find that you don't come across such a person, well, I'm here to tell you that you're gonna do amazing things, and you're doing amazing things. So I made the sun a little smaller, and right now if we change the fill, have a look. It changes the power of the sun. The power of the sun in the power of my hands. Which movie is that? Let me know. So right here, I'm going to place the sun right here and change the fill accordingly to see what works. Now, if you feel like you have chosen the wrong color for the sun, don't worry about it. Simply create a solid color adjustment layer. Click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose solid color. And you can choose whatever color you want. Hit OK. Now, we want to apply this color just to this layer. And how did we make it happen in lesson 2? We held the Alt key or the Option key and clicked on the line between these 2 layers to create a clipping mask. Now, you can double click on the symbol of the adjustment layer and change it to whatever you want. Real time, so cool, isn't it? Green, blue, maybe some aliens coming in. So you can get creative with it. So this color is fine with me, hit OK. And even before adding that, it was okay. So that is just to show you in case you want to change the colors. Now to add the glare, we can take the help of gradient fill. Remember we discussed fill layers. So if you click on the adjustment layer icon, we have 3 fills. Solid color, we already used it, gradient and pattern. Let us choose a gradient. It fills the image with a gradient. Now this is a gradient which goes from color to transparent. You can choose whatever gradient you want. Just single click right here. And on the left hand side, you can choose whatever color. And on the right hand side, we can choose whatever color. Let's say we choose green. And this is just to understand it. Now at the top, we have opacity control. So on the left hand side, the opacity is at 100. So the color right here is absolutely opaque. But on the right hand side, the opacity is 0. So if we increase the opacity, this is how the gradient is gonna look. Again, how do we change the color? By double clicking on these sliders, and you can change the color to whatever you want. If you double click on the slider, you can change the color to whatever you want. Just come on. All right. Another way to do it is if you single click on the slider, you can click on the color to change it from here. So many ways of doing the same thing in Photoshop. You can even manually dial in the location. So 26 is at 26. This is 78, and all the way on the right hand side is 100. So lots of different ways. So we want to create a gradient like the sun. On the left hand side, we want a bright yellow color, something like this. And on the right hand side, as it fades away, it becomes a little bit reddish. So select the slider, click on the color, and let's choose this red. hit OK. And also we want this to fade away, right? So as it gradually goes from yellow to red, it should also become transparent. So click on the slider above which controls the opacity and let's decrease it to 0. So this is what we want. Now this is a linear gradient, and by the way, here's a cool trick. When you have the gradient fill properties open, if you don't have open, for now, let's hit OK. If you double click on it, it's open right now. So when you have it open, you can click and drag and move it around any way you like. So cool. Now you have different styles of gradients. You have linear, you have angle, you have reflected, very many styles. This is reflected, this is angle. All right, so we're going to choose radial because that's what we want and place it right above here. All right, you can also change the size by changing the scale right here. You can also reverse the gradient. If you click on it, it will absolutely reverse the gradient. All right, once you're satisfied, hit OK. Now I know this doesn't look right because it's making the sun darker and a lot of other things darker. The only job of this glare is to brighten the image because it's a glare. So what is the blend mode that we learned brightens? We learned that multiply darkens, screen brightens, overlay adds contrast, right? So let us go ahead and choose screen, and there you have your glare. You can decrease the opacity if you wish, but I like it at 100%, and then you can control the sun. So I'm going to make it slightly brighter at about 54, and that's how easily you can fake a sun in Photoshop. Now, if we turn off the gradient, we can move the sun anywhere we want. So cool. So I'm going to keep it right about here, hidden, and turn this on, of course. Double click on it and move it around, move it right about here. And I would increase the scale a little more to about 150. Now the entire image needs to be a little warmer to go with that style, right? And how do we make that happen? Just select the background layer and let's make a duplicate of that. How do we make a duplicate? By pressing Ctrl or Command J. Now, how do we warm it up? Before we do anything, let us not forget, go to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, hit OK. So that any filter we add, we can change the values later. Let's go to Filter and then Camera Raw Filter. We also touched upon it in the previous lesson. And we want to make it just warm, right? So inside of the basic settings, just increase the temperature. That's all. Now, when you do that, it makes the entire image a little brighter. So you might want to decrease the opacity to compensate for it. Okay. And if the image is looking too greenish, let's make it a little more magenta by moving this slider, the tint slider, towards magenta. That's all. So this is okay. Hit OK once you're satisfied. Now it goes with the entire theme. So cool. Now you can use this technique to light anything up like bulbs, even jewelry, and we made a video about it. You can check it out right here. Now these were just a few examples. You can use this difference of special blend mode in fill to do a variety of other things. Just experiment it. All of what I'm showing you today is something that I learned just by playing around with Photoshop. So just play around. So here's another video that we did on adding color contrast, which we added using a special blend mode and working with fill. So play with it, play with the 8 special blend modes, look how they react. It doesn't only have to be a solid color adjustment layer, it can be a texture too. Just experiment, play with it, have fun. Let us talk about the second and the final situation where the fill works a little differently, and that is layer styles. What do we mean by that? So right here, let's click on T, the text tool, and create some text on a different layer. Whenever you click, it will create the text on a different layer if the image layer is selected. So let's type in concrete. Let's make it bigger, of course. Press Ctrl or Command T, and let's make it bigger like this. All right, that looks good. Now, how do we center it? Right now, the Move tool is selected. Within the 3 dots, Align to Selection is selected always for me. So that is why I just press Ctrl or Command A and center it. This is horizontal or vertical? This is horizontal. Center it horizontally and let's center it vertically. Now, if we decrease the opacity and the fill, both are doing the same thing. Now, if we add a layer style by double clicking on the right hand side of the adjustment layer, and there are lots of effects we can add. Let us talk about drop shadow. So let's check drop shadow right here. It creates a shadow. Now you need to select this to look at the properties of the drop shadow. Otherwise you'd be like, hey, I checked drop shadow, but I'm not seeing drop shadow properties. Trust me, it happened with me a lot of times, and that is why I'm sharing the mistakes I have done. Now look at how beautiful the shadow it has added. You have all sorts of controls and you can play with it. Blend mode is set to multiply. Let's leave it at that for now. Let's keep it simple for now. If you click here, you can change the shadow color to whatever you want. But since the blend mode is multiply, it will only darken. So don't worry about it. Multiply is the blend mode which darkens. Hit OK. Now opacity simply controls the opacity of the shadow. Angle controls the angle of the shadow. You already know that. Use global light. You can check this when you add multiple shadows and you want all of those shadows to use the same angle. So let's say I added another drop shadow right here, and the distance of it is a little away, and it's like this. It's with a different opacity. So since use global light is checked, whenever I move the angle, it changes the angle of this soft shadow and also the hard shadow at the back. So that is why it's important. Yes, you can add multiple drop shadows. Let's delete one of them. So with this one selected, click on the delete button right there. Now you can of course control the distance of the shadow. You can control how soft the shadow is. The more you increase the size, the softer it becomes, and you can increase the spread to make it more and more dense. So I usually keep it 0 most of the times unless I need it. So that was the basics of drop shadow. But is this how I change the distance and the angle of my shadows? Of course not. Once you're in the drop shadow settings, watch this. You can take the cursor, click and drag the shadow wherever you want, and accordingly the angle and the distance changes. Pretty cool, isn't it? So I'm going to place it right about here, decrease the size to about this, and hit OK. Now, if you decrease the opacity, everything becomes more and more transparent. However, if you decrease the fill, the shadow stays the same, and the main layer material, that becomes transparent. And you can use this technique to create a variety of effects. Play with drop shadow. In this case, I'm just going to make it a little softer so that it shows up at the top like this. And of course, we have to follow the angle of the light. So in this wall or texture, the light is coming from right here. So we have to follow that angle, and I think the angle is pretty proper. On top of that, we can even add something like bevel and emboss. So if you check bevel and emboss, make sure you select it, by the way. And there you have it. Look at the effect. Now you can control the depth like this. You can control the size like this. Just play with these. It will make sense. Now you should definitely match the lighting. The light is coming from right here. So set the angle of the light accordingly like that. And there you are. So I'm going to decrease the size, keep it like this. And that looks fantastic. Hit OK. And there you go. And if you move it around, look at it. It's surreal, isn't it? So I'm going to keep it right here. And this is one of the effects you can do with the difference between opacity and fill. And again, if you decrease just the opacity, the whole thing becomes more and more transparent. If you decrease just the fill, the layer style just stays the way it is and everything else becomes transparent. So those, my friends, are the differences between opacity and fill. I hope you enjoy the projects and follow along. Just to give you a quick revisions, opacity and fill in most general terms would react the same way, would work the same way. However, there are two special scenarios where fill works differently as opposed to opacity. Number one is when you choose one of those 8 special blend modes. If you choose them, fill controls the projection. It feels as if it's interacting with the layer, whereas opacity just makes it more or less transparent. The second situation is when we use layer styles. If you decrease the opacity, it makes the whole thing more transparent, but if you decrease the fill, it keeps the layer style intact. So that's pretty much it for this video. I hope it helped you, and if it did, make sure to give us a like, and also don't forget to subscribe, and not just subscribe. Ring the bell so that you, my friend, don't miss any other future tips, tricks, or tutorials. I would like to take this moment to thank all of these nice and amazing people for supporting PiXimperfect on Patreon and helping keep PiXimperfect free for everybody forever and making this series possible. This is a free series all throughout. I hope this helps you because I'm having a blast teaching you. Thank you so much again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.
What can I do?